So, good morning and welcome to our seminar, Geopolitical Tuesday. I would like to thank especially Dr. Teresa Usewicz from Polish Naval Academy for accepting our invitation. I'm very happy to welcome you to our lecture, France and Great Britain towards the evolution of the EU, European security. For our audience on the Zoom, please turn off your microphones and camera. And for your information, this conference is recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. We welcome also all pets and students. So I would like to remind our students, welcome, that the deadline for submitting your essay is 20th of December 2022. My name is Kinga Torbicka. I'm the research fellow at the Center for French Culture and Francophone Studies at the University of Warsaw. At the beginning, I will present both of us, then our lecture will start. Afterwards, we invite you to question and answer session, and please write your questions and comments on the chat. So let me present my colleague, Teresa Usewicz. Teresa Usewicz is the head of the International Security Facility at the Faculty of Command and Naval Operations at the Polish Naval Academy in Gdynia. The author of several dozen scientific articles and monographs, her research and teaching activity focuses primarily on the common security and defense policy of the European Union, especially its maritime aspects. My name is Kinga Torbicka. I'm the research fellow at the Center for French Culture and Francophone Studies at the University of Warsaw. My main research interests are security in the EU and NATO, geopolitical and military dimensions, comparative analysis of the national security systems of EU countries, in particular the systems of Poland and France. So now we invite you and we will present our lecture entitled France and Great Britain towards the evolution of the EU European security. So thank you, Teresa, for the presentation, for sharing the screen. So on the occasion of the upcoming 11th of November, the Armistice Day, and also on the occasion of the 12th anniversary of the signing of the Lancaster Treaty on the 2nd of November 2010 between France and Great Britain, establishing a partnership in the field of security and defense, it is worth to re-examine the potential of two nuclear powers in Europe in the context of the definition of a new European security architecture. In March 2022, the presentation of the strategic compass by the European Union took place. The 29th of June 2022 in Madrid, the strategic concept of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was released. This additionally emphasizes the importance of security and defense in contemporary international relations. Next slide, please. This lecture aims to present an analysis of the position of France and Great Britain towards the evolution of the EU-European security. The revision of both of these positions, its multidimensionality and complexity, show how diverse are the visions of national security and also the role and importance of the EU-European security in shaping the contemporary security in Europe. It seems important to underline that France and Great Britain have different perceptions of their national security. For Great Britain, security is about the Navy, enhanced cooperation with NATO and the US, and the pursuit of global Britain. On the other hand, France sees its security in terms of strategic autonomy, the intervention forces, and the region of Southern Europe are important. Two different visions of national security, the French one, based on European security and sovereignty, the British one being pro-Atlantic. However, France and the United Kingdom share common strategic characteristics. They are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, possess nuclear weapons, recognized as such in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, show global ambitions, and, above all, regularly use military force in operations. Also, both countries have the full spectrum of military capabilities and diplomatic influence, which makes them a leader in the post-Brexit and post-COVID international architecture, as well as in the current war in Ukraine. Submitting a deeper analysis of the divergence of national visions, the need to create a common European security policy and to create a real power out of Europe clearly reverberates. The current French president, Emmanuel Macron, mentions it many times. In his famous speech at the Sorbonne University, 26th of September 2017, he emphasized, Europe must protect us, protect its citizens. Contrary to Great Britain, which since 2016 slowly withdrew from political and economic involvement in European common security and defense policy, in order to create its own autonomous security concept. In the report of the Working Group on European Security of the Senate of the French Republic, Great Britain was indicated as one of the most important, next to Germany, life partners. Collaboration with UK is described as rich and varied. Britain, on the other hand, leads France as an equal ally despite mutual competition, treating France as a counterweight to German interests in Europe. However, the situation should be analyzed taking the process of the UK's exit from the EU as a turning point, as Brexit changed the balance of power in Europe, which requires reflection of the future shape of security in Europe. With the above consideration in mind, This presentation aims to look at the development perspective of the EU's common security and defense security policy, taking into account the bilateral relations of the two countries. From this perspective, it seems justified to analyze the two strategic EU initiatives, the Global Strategy for the Foreign and Security Policy of the European Union and the EU Strategic Compass. And the next slide, please. Thank you. Since 2014, the situation in Europe has contributed to the activation and intensification of activities in the area of European security and defense. The new strategic environment of the Union, the war in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, the growing economic crisis, the growing power of China, and the process of creating the EU strategic compass gave impetus to the development of the CSDP. The preliminary analysis raises the following questions. Does the Franco-British cooperation on the bilateral and multilateral level, EU and non-EU, create a real and the solid basis for European integration in the area of security and defense? Has Brexit strengthened the efforts to cooperate between the two countries in terms of security in Europe, or has it contributed to the breakdown of the existing ties? As a result of the questions asked, the following research questions were formulated. What challenges and threats should determine the efforts of France and Great Britain in the process of developing security and defense policies? How has the cooperation of both countries shaped and can continue to shape the European security and defense policy? And what will be the foreseen directions of cooperation between France and the UK in the medium and long term in the context of European security after Brexit? At the initial state of the research, a hypothesis was generated according to which it was assumed that Europe is in the process of rebuilding its security and defense policy. We are witnessing the intensification of discussions on European defense and security, which gives an impulse to introduce a number of initiatives under the CSDP. Since 2014, the course of the debate on European security within the European Union and de facto emerging differences of opinion between France and the UK constituted mutual complementarity based on the ambitions and security sensitivity of the two countries. However, at the same time, they were a serious obstacle to the deep integration of security interest. And the next slide, please. The following research methods were used in the presented lecture: synthesis, interpretation, and analysis. The methodology of this presentation focuses on the methodology of research relevant to the following scientific fields: political science, Geopolitics and International Relations. The presentation is based on an in-depth analysis of source documents from the EU institutions, the French presidency of the EU Council, and the French and British governments. Speeches and declarations by French and British politicians, also the expertise, opinions, and science studies of French and British political scientists and specialists in international relations were also analyzed. And the next slide. 3 strategic documents define the national security and defense policy of the French Republic. They are White Paper on Defense and National Security, Defense and National Security Strategic Review, and Strategic Update 2021. And the next slide. The last document, entitled the Strategic Update 2021, focuses on 4 key elements of French security. In the political dimension, France wants to consolidate the cooperation with NATO and promote the coherence of European defense within the EU. Through the modernization of the army and the defense sector, artificial intelligence, cyber space, energy security space, France aims to strengthen its defense strategy in cooperation with its allies. France seeks to strengthen the European sovereignty by strengthening the EU's defense dimension, developing technological cooperation, and a targeted industrial policy within the Union. And France also aims to modernize the armed forces, implementation of the program Ambition 2030, ability to conduct independent missions and interventions. Moreover, the document defines the most important threats to the security of France. They are terrorism, a threat from Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and the jihadists, weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, Iran and North Korea are listed there, the return of the rivalry of great powers, threats from China and Russia, as well as danger that might arise from rivalry between China and the US. Hybrid war affecting the following domains: cyberspace, outer space, disinformation zone, and legal war. And the next slide. France is a military and nuclear power with superpower ambitions. It has 290 nuclear warheads, which gives it the 4th place in the world ranking. As Nicolas Sarkozy announced in 2008 that the nuclear weapons stage nuclear deterrent and life insurance policy for France. In its white paper on defense and national security, France claims that its deterrent strategy is strictly defensive and that the use of nuclear weapons would be conceivable in extreme circumstances of legitimate self-defense, and that nuclear deterrence protect France from any state-led aggression against its vital interests of whatever origin and in whatever form, including terrorism. It was confirmed by François Hollande, former president, in 2015. He emphasized, for France, the goal of nuclear weapons is not to gain an advantage in the conflict due to the devastating effect of nuclear weapons. They have no place in an offensive strategy. They are designed only in a defense strategy. Deterrence also allows us to remain free to act and decide under our circumstances. This is also underlined by the current French president, Emmanuel Macron. And the next slide. French armed forces are composed of French Army, French Navy, French Air Force, French National Gendarmerie, National Guard. The head of the armed forces is the President of the French Republic. French armed forces are made up of professional soldiers and civilian personnel. And the next slide. In 2022, France has the largest army in the European Union, consisting 205,000 active soldiers. In addition, it has 30,000 soldiers who are stationed in foreign missions around the world. And next slide, please. France promotes the strategic autonomy of the EU on the European Forum, which is to complement its security. It is to be served by the development of French conventional and nuclear forces and cooperation with strategic partners. It strives to complete national independence in the field of security and defense. According to the Act of Programming Military Expenditure for 2019-2025, in 2021, the third year covered by the law, the military expenditure was to increase to 1.7 billion euros compared to 2020 and was amount to 39 billion euros. This means an increase in spending of 6.8 billion euros between 2017 and 2021, an increase of 21%. The act was signed in 2018 by Emmanuel Macron. It confirms France's readiness to reach 2% of GDP for military spending by 2025 and provides for military spending in the period 2019-2025 of 198 billion euros. In 2022, France's military spending is set to reach 41 billion euros, or 2% of GDP. And next slide. On 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. This completely changed the perception of Russia by France. From the beginning of Emmanuel Macron's presidency, he tried to restart Franco-Russian relations. For example, the visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin in Versailles in 2017 was significant. The President of France was looking for areas of cooperation, trying to develop his own methods of cooperation between France and Russia to create a counterbalance to Chinese interests in the world. The war in Ukraine revised France's approach to Russia and changed this attitude into dimensions: change of behavior, more understanding for states feeling threatened by Russia, while maintaining diplomatic dialogue with Vladimir Putin in the hope of finding consensus after all, noticing the danger presented by Russia. The threat was seen as multi-geographic. It could affect many places in the world. For example, in Africa, Russia could threaten French interests in Mali, the Sahel countries, and the Central African Republic. This means a brutal awakening of the current French policy towards Russia and the introduction of concrete and systemic measures towards Ukraine. I would like to present you some examples of concrete French actions for supporting Ukraine. For example, humanitarian aid amounting 120 million euros. Operation Ship for Ukraine, launched the 28th of September 2022. Support for refugees from Ukraine, including help for the Red Cross. Aid for the reconstruction of Ukraine, the conference in Lugano in July 2022. The initiative Food Safety, Food and Agriculture Resilience Mission. Economic support, for example, FAECO funds at the regional level of local governments. Military support, delivery of anti-tank and anti-aircraft systems, individual armaments also. France has provided the César howitzers, truck equipped with an artillery system, French self-propelled howitzer. The 6th of October 2022, Emmanuel Macron announced also his intention to set up a special fund to help Ukraine buy military equipment and weapons directly from French manufacturers. The initial value of the fund is 100 million euros. And also training of Ukrainian soldiers by the French soldiers in Poland in framework of the European Union training mission. And now I invite Teresa to present her part.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. It's a really pleasure for me to participate in this event. And Kinga has already introduced me, so I'm going to move on to our topic. And the topic of my speech, as you can see, is concerned with the British position of the CSDP. As you know, the CSDP is an acronym, and this means the Common Security and Defense Policy of the European Union. And during my lecture, if you have some questions on my topic, please write them on the chat. It will be easier for me to give you a full answer after my speech. So please don't hesitate and write on the chat if you have any questions, of course. And let's move on. Mostly, I would like to say a few things about British defense and policy and British defense and military potential. And then I would like to say a few things about British position on CSDP. So first of all, there is no doubt that the UK is one of the key players in the European and global security environment. Traditionally, the UK is related to Euro-Atlantic security and defense structures, especially NATO, of course. And the UK has global interests, and the British Army has a permanent presence at 145 bases. Which are located in 42 countries or territories around the world, such as Cyprus, Canada, and Poland as well. At the moment, on the Polish territory, we have about 150 soldiers from Great Britain. The main part of the potential of the UK is nuclear potential maintained as a deterrent. The British nuclear stockpile counts no more than 260 warheads. And it should be also pointed that the British nuclear weapons are operationally independent, and only the Prime Minister can authorize their use. The British government considers using nuclear weapons only in extreme circumstances of self-defense, and including the defense of British NATO allies. When we want to estimate the British or other countries' military potential estimate, we can use the global firepower ranking. There are about 50 factors which are counted in this ranking, among others manpower, equipment, natural resources, finances, and even geography. And the GFP provides interesting glimpse on military potential, mostly states. It's very important, especially in the modern, unstable world. And what is the British place in the GFP ranking? As you can see, the UK has 8th place in the GFP ranking, with defense spending at 68 billion, and this gives it 4th place in this ranking in the finance aspects. What is more, the UK will exceed defense spending required by NATO. And now the British defense spending total is at 2.2% of GDP. And is driving forward a modernization program that embraces the newer domains of cyber and space, equipping British armed forces with cutting-edge technology. And the next very important part of British potential is a maritime domain. When it comes to the UK, there is no doubt that it is a maritime state. Great Britain has a long maritime tradition, and it is no exaggeration to say that Britain's power comes from maritime potential. And I would like to say something more about the power of British maritime potential. And I use the World Directory of Modern Military Warships ranking for this purpose. And this ranking allows for total naval units. And in 2022, Great Britain has 9th position, right after France. And the British Royal Navy has 51 naval units, especially multi-missions, frigates, mine warfare, and submarines, of course. The UK has 2 modern aircraft carriers. Those warships are an important factor enabling the projection of power from a distance. And de facto protection and defense of its British interests in various remote parts of the world. And the last but not least, in a maritime domain aspect, is that according to the current review of security and defense, the UK will maintain 4 submarines, and at least 1 will always be at sea as a deterrent patrol. What should be also stated, the UK is one of the main producers weapons in the world. There is about 60 defense companies, Airbus, Lockheed Martin Corporation, Leonardo CPA, Thales Group. Those are some of the prominent players in the UK and world defense market, actually. And this is additional factor which strengthens the international position of the UK. And I would like to focus for a moment on the national shipbuilding strategy. This document was updated in March 2022. And according to this document, the shipbuilding industry supports 42,600 jobs right across the country and adds 2.8 billion to the UK economy. It supports a vast supply chain and skilled jobs around the country in both the civil and defense sectors, and delivers world-leading capabilities for the Royal Navy. This was quotes from this document, and as you can see, being one of the main producers of weapons strengthens the economy of the UK and the geopolitical international position as well. And now let's move on to the political assumptions of defense and security of the UK. Most of all, up to 2016, when Brexit took place, the British foreign policy was based on 3 pillars. First of all, the most traditional direction of the British policy is on Atlanticism, and it means mostly cooperation with the US. And And Great Britain is sort of the bridge between European countries and the US. Actually, as Europe and the US, we work together. But of course, there are large differences between European and American strategic culture. So the UK connects European and American perspective to the international security environment. And the second pillar was multilateralism. That means creating safety through the cooperation. And it means as well effective rules-based international order. And the last pillar was the common foreign and security policy. And within this, the common security and defense policy. And as you know, those politics are led within the EU, of course. After Brexit, the last pillar is no longer valid. The UK hasn't been involved in defense and security policy of the EU, at least as the member states. Additionally, the world order, which it has been known since the beginning of 19th, is declining, and the new world order is coming. So, what does it mean for the UK and for us as well? In my opinion, the main attribute of modern times is a deep insecurity. The multilateral world has been undermined by Russia, of course, by China, and even by the US sometimes. It was very interesting, surprising rather, when the Donald Trump approach showed that the US perspective could be different, more nationalist, more skeptical, more mercantile. But luckily, it was kind of an exception to the rule. However, Joe Biden always says that NATO is very important for the US, for the European countries and the UK as well. And what about the UK and the common security and defense policy of the EU? As I already said, up to Brexit, the CSDP was one of the three pillars of the British security policy. So first of all, you have to be aware that UK was always skeptical when it comes to the CSDP of the EU, but at the same time, Great Britain was one of the key players in the EU, so they were able to force their interests in the EU. And since the Brexit, the British approach to the CSDP has changed. It's quite a natural process. The UK isn't a member state any longer, so they cannot decide the direction of the evolution of the CSDP, and they cannot decide when and how to should react the EU in a crisis. But of course, Great Britain can cooperate with the EU if they want to do this, of course. And the UK at the moment is in the same situation as other European countries which want to cooperate with the EU, but it would require a special agreements each time. And as I said, Great Britain was always skeptical member states in the EU, and actually they didn't believe in implementing a real defense and security policy of the EU. They strongly believe in NATO and the cooperation with the US. But according to Great Britain, when it comes to the CSDP, They are pointed some success. For instance, sanctions against Russia, support to Ukraine, Operation Sophia, Operation Atlanta, and Operation Althea. Especially Atlanta is still going, of course, but it was led by British, and it takes place in the Gulf of Aden near Somalia, and it was considered by the UK as an important element in the development of defense capabilities in crisis management by European countries. But what does the UK want from the CSDP? First of all, cooperation and coordination, especially when the EU and the UK have common interests. At the moment, there is a need for the safety for the safety of the EU and the UK. And I mean the war in Ukraine, of course. So that is fundamentally a vital issue to speak as one voice about the Ukraine issue. Only solidarity and common support can allow Ukraine to win the war, and the victory of Ukraine is necessary for the British and EU interests. How about the CSDP after Brexit? So the lack of potential from the UK side, the lack of potential British armies and British economy of the CSDP may be, and the British economy may weaken actually the CSDP, but on the other hand, it can mean there will be lack of skeptical states as well, and some decisions which can mean strengthening of the CSDP may be easier. And it means a chance to improve some of the European defense capabilities, especially from the perspective of France, for instance. And as you know, France always been a supporter of the creative strategy and autonomy of the EU. And as you know, the British government has a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And what does it mean, Sunak, for the British defense and security policy? What can we expect in the near future? So first of all, Sunak is the next conservative leader. He is from the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party supported hard Brexit. So Sunak, he is someone who believes that Britain is better off outside of the EU. And what can we expect in the near future? First of all, there are many international challenges which Rishi Sunak, internal challenges, which Rishi Sunak will have to be resolved. The most important challenge at the moment is addressing the deep economic crisis, and he also has to unite his party. So I suppose that the cooperation between EU and the UK, it won't be a priority for Sunak. And to sum up, what is the future of cooperation between the UK and the EU within the CSDP? Firstly, the hardline right wing of the Conservative Party may block cooperation within the CSDP. What is more, looking at the EU and the UK relations, cooperation has remained very selective. There has been no structured dialogue since the beginning of 2021, apart from the ongoing negotiations on Brexit aftermath, especially with regard to Northern Ireland. After Brexit, London is focusing on expanding its bilateral cooperation in Europe, for instance, with France, with Germany, and with Poland as well. especially in the field of foreign and security policy. But you have to be aware that cooperation between the EU and the UK, it's a necessity. The EU and Great Britain create together a community of values. We have a common threats, common challenges, especially nowadays. We have a large-scale war in Europe. So our cooperation in the field of foreign and security policy, I'm sorry, our cooperation should be as closely as possible. And thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. And Kinga, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa, for your very interesting parts of our presentation. So I will continue with global strategy and strategic compass. In 2019, Emmanuel Macron warned Europe will disappear unless it is an important force with military capabilities. To prevent this vision, one of the goals of the last French presidency of the Council of the European Union was to make the Union an important player with strong political ambitions in the arena of international relations in the new geopolitical reality. France is seeking strategic autonomy, as Teresa mentioned, for the EU that will face the Sino-American rivalry. An analysis of the global strategy for the European Union's foreign and security policy and the strategic compass for security and defense, two of the most important strategic documents of the EU in recent years, seems here justified. They show how to use security and defense dimensions are evolving. The European Union's global strategy was established to outline the concept of CSDP development and also to bring different national visions and strategic cultures closer together. The strategy identifies 5 key pillars on which the Union's priority are to be based. Security, strengthening the southern and eastern flanks of the EU, unified crisis management, regional cooperation, cooperation on the global level. 3 strategic security and defense areas have also been defined: crisis and conflict management, intensification of strategic partners' capacities, protection of community and societies. The dangers facing the EU have also been defined: cyberspace, organized crime, violation of external borders, terrorism, climate change, and the economic crisis. The strategy launched the following security and defense initiatives: the European Defense Action Plan, CSDP operational planning and mission capabilities, permanent structured cooperation in the field of security and defense, PESCO, which aims to strengthen defense cooperation in the development of military and operational capabilities, coordinated annual review on defense, which is closely related to PESCO and aims to improve the transparency and coordination, which aims to finance the EU's joint military operations under the CSDP. And the next slide, please. Defining of the strategic compass for security and defense began during the German presidency of the EU Council in 2020 and ended during the French presidency in 2022. The Union has made an attempt to position itself in the new concert of powers by defining strategic goals and ambitions and identifying threats and challenges in the field of security and defense. The compass covers crisis management, capabilities, and strategic partnerships up to 2030. Next slide, please. Priority it is based on priority actions in 4 work strands: ACT, crisis management, creation of a rapid reaction force, 5,000 soldiers, capable of operating in crisis situations, strengthening civil and military CSDP missions and operations, securing the Union against new threats by providing means and instruments to counteract the threats, invest, increasing defense spending to implement military investments to ensure the competitiveness of the Union. Partnerships, cooperation with international organizations and strategic countries, for example, USA and Canada. In the current situation of redefining the international order, the post-COVID pandemic situation, and of course the war in Ukraine, the CSDP needs an agreement beyond divisions, striving for common European solidarity in sovereignty, where complementarity of the vision counts. And the next slide, please. Emmanuel Macron promotes the sovereignty and autonomy of the CSDP on the European Forum, like Teresa mentioned, which are intended to meet the challenges of modern security and at the same time to implement French and European ambitions in this area. In the program of the last French presidency of the Council of the European Union, France defines the objectives of the CSDP around 3 pillars: a strengthened European defense, integrated security, intensifying defense cooperation. Nicolas Tenzer, a political scientist, French political scientist, emphasized that the power and strength were not considered attributes needed to build the European communities. The aim was to guarantee peace in Europe by rebuilding economies, guaranteeing the well-being of citizens, and strengthening democracy. And this is what Emmanuel Macron wants to change when he says Europe must stop being naive. It must defend its interests and build its own military potential. He wants a strengthening of European security, a strengthening of Europe's strategic autonomy and sovereignty, and as a result of international peace and security. Together with Great Britain, which is the second nuclear power in Europe, and despite leaving the EU, remains an important, very important and strategic partner in building the European security architecture. In the historical perspective, the relationship between France and Great Britain is symbolized by the rhetorical question, entente cordiale, or the European engine. In the post-war period, France and Great Britain tried to agree on an effective European defense. However, this attempt quickly led to discrepancy. In the late 1950s, the priorities were very clear: the European choice for France and the American choice for the British. This discrepancy lasted until Great Britain joined the European communities in 1973. The Great Britain understood that despite its special relations with the United States, it was internationally outdated, remaining in the rhetoric of a superpower confrontation. The turning point was possible thanks to Margaret Thatcher, thanks to Maastricht Treaty, of 1993, by means of which the European Union tried to define a common European security policy. From then on, a real European defense seemed possible, and the Franco-British summit in Saint-Malo in 1998 began to define the Franco-British axis of this cooperation. However, with the 2003 Iraq war, the American choice of London once again pitted Britain against France and divided Europe. The new reality we find ourselves in is a sufficient argument for enhanced Franco-British security cooperation. In terms of defense, the French and the British maintain a close and strong relationship based on very solid foundations. Following the UK decision to leave the EU, the British discourse on foreign and defense policy was inspired by the global Britain narrative. This narrative also makes sense if UK is able to develop or maintain ambitious partnerships with the EU or with individual member states. By deepening bilateral cooperation with France, the Great Britain aims to maintain the role of one of the main actors in the European defense and security policy. 12 years after signing of the Lancaster House Treaties of November 2010 on defense and security and nuclear cooperation, we are seeing strategic, political, and economic rationale for bilateral cooperation. The current state of Franco-British relations was threatened by Brexit. Emmanuel Macron called for a stronger EU based on a strengthened Franco-German partnership. But the current international context strengthens the case for a close Franco-British relationship in the field of defense and security, and that is beneficial to both partners and the EU. Therefore, an intensification of the Franco-British cooperation is to be expected. France, next to Germany, is a key actor in the EU and at the same time a promoter and initiator of projects enhancing the EU military potential and capabilities. In the document Global Britain quoted above, the Franco-British partnership is seen as deep and with long traditions. Its examples are the Lancaster House Treaties and also the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force. The treaty proves that the Franco-British partnership is based on solid foundations, and Brexit, paradoxically, can strengthen them even more, mainly because differences resulting from different perspectives on strengthening the CSDP are no longer an obstacle in mutual relations. Of course, this does not mean that the historically shaped antagonism between these countries have been eliminated. Europe's French strategic autonomy versus the British transatlantic security concept will likely clash in the international space from time to time. And as Richard Davis notes, the Franco-British rivalry still seems firmly rooted in attitudes, and past differences may reappear in a short time when each side is ready to take its previous positions and resume the struggle of the ancestors. So thank you very much for your attention. So now we invite you to question and answer session. If you have some questions, please write the questions on the chat. We will try to respond on your questions or maybe to comment your comments. I see one question from Alexis Martinand. Could France play the same role as the UK for US?
So many questions.
Yes, so many questions. So I will manage the first one. I think it is a very interesting question. Thank you very much. I think it's more about also the traditions of security and defense policy, because as we presented in our lecture, UK is more for transatlantic relations, traditionally been very close with US, and for France is more about build the strategic autonomy and the European autonomy. For sure, France would be and could be play the same role as the UK for example, in the framework of the NATO. But it's more about the historically traditions and more about traditions of defense policy. So now I see another question from Amelia Głowacka. What are the current specific actions of French and British cooperation concerning the topic of the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
I think supporting of Ukraine, military supporting, is the main direction of the cooperation between European countries and between France and Great Britain as well. And I think at the moment, NATO is the main platforms to supporting Ukraine. So in my opinion, the cooperation will be organized in especially in NATO, and bilateral cooperation, especially for Great Britain, is very important as well, as I already said during my lecture. So according to me, supporting military supporting for Ukraine is the vital issue at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's exactly the same from me. I think this is very important to show how the solidarity is very important in European cooperation. And for sure, French and British cooperation is very important also in the framework of this Russian invasion, and also to show how we support Ukraine. It is more about the cooperation in the framework of NATO, but also in the bilateral relation. So the next question from Federica Cautero. Now that Great Britain, one of the main actors in the European defense and security, is no longer part of the European Union, considering its power and its role, how will the CSDP replace it?
Okay, it's a very good question. Historically, the UK has provided amount 2.3% of total personnel contributions in the European operation, but an estimated 20% of the EU force catalog, including strategic enablers such as airlift, refueling, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The UK has the UK principal contribution to EU-led operation. So the UK was a very important part of the CSDP, and so what can I say about how can we replace it? We have to pay more for the CSDP, and that's it. There is no another way. We have to replace the lack of potential, military potential and economic potential after Brexit. So this is the simple answer for this question.
If it is possible, of course. And the second part of this question is how and why the lack of UK among the EU member may be an opportunity in the development of European defense capability.
Okay, so as you know, I'm sure that you are aware that UK was always against to strengthen the CSDP, and they strongly believe in NATO, but not in the CSDP. So there is at the moment there is a from one side there is a lack of potential of Great Britain, but from the other side there is no more skeptical states, in my opinion. So it paradoxically it can strengthen the CSDP because maybe some decisions can make easier, because there is no Great Britain, and France, as Kinga already said, traditionally supports to strengthen the CSDP. So maybe it's kind of chance to strengthen, because there is no skeptical country as was Great Britain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question from Shugo Kikuchi. Will France accept immigrants who lost their destination to Britain by Brexit? And which country in EU will be the destination of migration? So I understand that this question concerned the Ukrainian migrants. In 2021 in France, they were 100,000 Ukrainian migrants already lived in France. And after the war, after 24th of September, during six months, 100,000 Ukrainians came to France. Like you know, in the same time, about 3 million Ukrainians came to Poland. So I think it will be the same. And in the future, the Ukrainian migrants will come to the countries which is near to the Ukrainian borders in central and eastern countries, probably in Poland also. The next question from Philip Kania. What are the opinions of the British nation on the country's stability in terms of recent rapid government change and existing the European Union?
Okay, so Great Britain was my part of lecture, but this is a very good question, but unfortunately it's not a strictly area of my scientific interests. So I wouldn't like to speak in this matter because I don't know actually what are the opinions of the British nation. I don't know, but I promise that I will try to refer to this problem is an article that we are going to publish with Kinga in the near future. So sorry for my answer. Maybe Kinga wants. Maybe do you want some ads for this question, because I don't know actually what are the opinions of the British nation on the country's stability.
The British are not very happy with all the situation about political chaos and also about economic crisis, and in particular in energy prices crisis. We observe the very big intensive action Don't Pay UK, for example. It was about increasing the energy prices, and finally the government decided to define the cap of energy prices. So I think the British societies are very not very happy and quite not very sure about their future and about their economic situation in the future.
Yes, the deep economic crisis is the most urgent issue at the moment, definitely.
So I think we will stop here. Unfortunately, we have to finish our seminar, and thank you very much for your very interesting questions. Thank you, Teresa, for sharing.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can meet also at another seminar and topic for sure, this important and current subject. We invite you to our next seminar on 22nd of November. Professor Anne-Laure Amilhat-Shari will present the geopolitics of borders, the vision of the world. So thank you very much for today and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.